The punishment for Max Verstappen was utterly absurd. This isn't acceptable. I believe 24 races is far too much. 20 is enough. 18 is fine. Christian Horner leads 2 F1 teams, and that's bad.
Greetings, Motorsport-Magazin.com friends and F1 fans. Welcome to the AVD Motorsport Magazine with Christian Danner, episode 18 of this season. Now about the Singapore Grand Prix. Hi Christian, did you enjoy it?
Yes, hello everyone. I enjoy every Grand Prix because there's always something to talk about, and I particularly liked the one in Singapore. After all, it was the first night race in Formula One history, and it still is a night race. I always found it annoying because you couldn't go out for dinner after the event, since it was already past 1 in the morning. Still, I was excited for Singapore, and I'm not in Germany.
By the way, a great spot is Newton Circus, where you can sometimes get a beer, even late at night after the sessions. Indeed, you weren't let down. You brought up the first night race, which was a huge scandal at the time with Crashgate. There's been another scandal, and we'll cover that in this episode too, but first let's focus on Max Verstappen and his conduct. You called me, I think it was Sunday, and mentioned you wanted to talk about this entire story, and there was more to discuss. What was going on? Max Verstappen swore a bit during the Thursday press conference, and he was summoned to the stewards for it. He received a penalty and then boycotted the FIA press conference, meaning he didn't answer in detail. Who is correct in this small dispute? Max Verstappen or the FIA?
First of all, my opinion is clear. It's ridiculous to punish a driver like this or to put him down. We need to look at the background a bit. What's really going on, or how did they come up with this? It may be interesting for our audience to realize that there is a really significant difference between the things what the FIA would like. The FIA is the governing body of the sport and has an ethical or behavioral code element in its rules in the so-called sporting code, which states that one should not hammer each other and should treat each other decently. This is something every sports authority has, including the IOC and even footballers, and it is in general definitely good that this exists. On the other hand, the FOM, which is the commercial rights holder, in other words, Liberty Media, the Americans, has very different ideas. The louder the crashes, the more intense the insults, the more brutal people are to one another. The better it is for the sports business in the United States of America. And we are, of course, in stark contrast. Those people responsible for broadcasting these things, for example, that one can hear the radio communications cursing Yuki Tsunoda with fuck all over the place, I can say that since it's not the FIA, this is all from the FOM, meaning the follower management creates what is known as the world feed, including the audio that can be heard in the world feed, and that includes the radio messages and recently also in written form, so you can also read along nicely if you want what the drivers are saying if you didn't get it. And here there are of course two worlds that clash. Now it is tough to get them to agree on anything, and that is also a reason why I have no sympathy for this impulsive penalty scenario. In this case against Verstappen, totally inappropriate. However, I understand that the FIA insists we must treat each other decently. This is contrary to what Formula One management desires. The more spectacular, louder and wilder the better. And I believe it's high time for both parties, FIA and FOM, to have a conversation about this and to seek dialogue with the drivers. You can't just hit out and say, Mr. Verstappen, you are now the world champion and you'll probably win another title soon, so we're penalizing you. That's not okay. It's utterly ridiculous. Once you also make a fool of yourself, yes, even if there is a bit of logic in the whole process behind it, but that didn't come across. I think we should reflect on this a bit.
The International Sporting Code didn't change overnight. Do you think this is a bit of a one-man show by our president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem? Regarding Liberty Media, as you pointed out, they have differing interests, and it's no secret that the relationship isn't great.
Yes, of course, because also the power struggle among the presidents is somewhat reflected in their actions. The FIA and its president believe they have the authority, which is actually true, and the FOM is saying right now, we're conducting business and business is paramount. We're in control. This conflict is basically unsolvable. The only thing to worry about is, and I think it should be pointed out, there are other sports where the authority is managed independently. In boxing, there are several bodies. In wrestling as well. In all these cases, the marketer creates their own regulations. And so, choices and punishments are made without clear reasoning, but about what brings the best profit. Thank God we have this division between the FIA and the FOM, and this should not happen through such, let's say, extremely clumsy actions, but rather through dialogue. I can only hope this might begin now, as one makes a fool of oneself in every way. Because for every child, excuse me for saying this, the way of speaking, I'd say, isn't particularly recommended, as we heard. But it's the most normal thing in the world for someone to curse when they're angry. And I feel reality should inspire us to engage in dialogue, especially in how we interact. Now we're talking about Max Verstappen. There I would say that there is some stress coming.
What was it like for you as a driver? Did you ever really curse into your helmet?
No, I always kept quiet, honestly. There's also Piastri, for instance, who says nothing at all. And concerning this issue, it is a Formula One champion versus FIA. Many probably don't remember, but Ayrton Senna had a significant issue with then-President Jean-Marie Balestre. Back then, however, the FIA was a complete mess. Back then. Today, it's a very well-organized association that does a lot for the sport. It's not like they're always evil, those silly, incompetent leaders and so forth. Back then, however, it was an incredibly personal war that Ayrton fought against Balestre. It was about fairness, about right decisions. They were obviously on a completely different level, which led to both suffering greatly from it. Ayrton was very impacted by this court, and Balestre, then former president, ultimately fell as president because of it. This has always been true, and in how to handle it, there are no winners. If everyone is obstinate, the weakest will eventually fall behind and life continues, but that's not how it works.
Unhealthy and unnecessary. But if I understood you correctly, you can empathize with Max Verstappen and think it's good he stayed silent at the press conference.
Yes, of course, it's always the same story. When an order is issued saying we're doing it this way against a driver, and these are real personalities, not just anyone who just strolled past the racetrack. They know who he is, what he desires, and how he perceives himself. And that's why I can completely understand him. He just must not underestimate how much energy it costs. This requires a lot of energy, which he actually needs to rescue the championship title. And I believe reasonably it would be smarter to have the often mentioned Christian Horner here, who says to his driver, "Hey buddy, let's go together and handle this." I can understand Verstappen, and I found it really nice that he put Tom Clarkson, the interviewer, who he put in a very tough position at the press conference by saying as little as possible. Everyone knows Tom Clarkson because he hosts the Beyond the Grid podcast and all that. He's a really nice, decent guy. And from that viewpoint, it's clear Verstappen is considering things. but I find the action itself remarkable because it's intelligent. It's not like I'm going to say, "You're all idiots," or I don't say anything. I just keep it to 1 or 2 syllables. And if anyone asks for something, I would just say, "Remember Kimi? He said even less, and there also nobody complained."
By the way, he prepared a statistic. Really? Yes, the average responses from Max Verstappen actually included the words at the FIA press conference on Sunday were 21.5 words. Lando Norris 129 words and Oscar Piastri with 126 words. Unfortunately, I don't have Kimi here. He would probably be at 5.
I also believe if at all it would be double digits, but only with luck.
Quickly to close the topic. Max Verstappen, you mentioned that this takes energy, and Verstappen himself has hinted again that he doesn't want to do this indefinitely, and if such things persist, then it might shorten it further. Do you actually think such a story could result in him saying a few years earlier, "You can all forget me"?
No, I don't think so, because this story will disappear. Not in the sense that it never occurred, but the parties involved will look for a conversation, find it, and come to a resolution. Especially since Christian Horner would prefer Verstappen to remain as long as he has a contract, that he continues to drive calmly with him and sets aside the emotions. The togetherness is important here, even if it's difficult. And I maintain that I completely understand Max, and I believe he handled it very smartly, because you can't really hold it against him for handling it this way. Everyone involved is urged to dialogue.
I promised at the beginning that we would deal with a scandal, or a small scandal in this episode. But first, there are your questions in your favorite segment, Ask AVD. Today's question comes from Tattoo Freak XWMQ, and Tattoo Freak wants to know from you, Christian. This season has a total of 30 races, which includes 24 Grand Prix and 6 sprints. Will this burden be significant at the end of the season, mentally and physically? In football, there are discussions among players about a potential strike due to too many games. Do you think that could happen in Formula One too?
So, dear Tattoo Freak, this is a matter we have discussed for years, and it has also been on the agenda of the GPDA for years, so it is discussed in the Drivers' Union. Personally, I have a dual perspective. First, subjectively, if I imagine having to drive 24 races, this is certainly beyond good and evil. It's a significant strain on the drivers and, of course, on everything else involved. Yes, we have different crews in Formula One, but essentially it's like this, that 24 races already put a significant strain on the team in all 24 cases. So in my opinion, that is definitely too much. This is my personal take. Now, from a broadcasting perspective, I mean, when you've commented on every Grand Prix for 25 years and have been present everywhere, then you know what the travel entails. But you also know what actually reaches the television audience. And I've always pointed out from the start, when we were at about 20 Grand Prix, that it's becoming too much as saturation is taking hold. One enjoys looking forward to a Grand Prix every 2 weeks. Then there's a highlight with the double header, one race right after another. But when it's just like, oh yes, they're racing again. Yes, they're racing again. Then that's not very beneficial for the attractiveness of Grand Prix racing. Personally, I think 24 races is too much. Logically, the FOM prefers it this way because there's a very, very high appearance fee, and that positively impacts the balance sheet. But from a driver's standpoint, I feel it's too much. 20 is adequate in my opinion. And for us consumers who also watch and enjoy it, I must honestly say 20 is enough too. But we can say anything we want. We won't manage to enforce that, as the commercial interest will take precedence.
And somehow it's particularly strange that after Singapore, we're actually going into a second summer or autumn break.
Yes,
Now we
indeed.
have another relatively long break. But for you at home, that's not a problem at all, because you might miss race starts, but not the AVD Motorsport-Magazin, because we've planned a special edition. I'm not sure if you know about it, Christian. We just decided to do it. We're actually doing a special with you. You get to answer more user questions. So now a call to you. If you have questions for our expert, feel free to write them under this video. Hashtag AskAVD.
I'm really excited about it. I love these viewer questions because it shows that the questions I have are also asked by the audience. Sometimes they're asked in wonderful variations by the viewers. You think about what's really happening? I love answering these questions because it shows the passion for our sport. And the more intricate the questions, the better. We will always find a response.
You enjoy them especially since you get a bit of a break from me. But that's enough. Let's move on to our second topic, the scandal or the tiny scandal or whatever you wish to call it. This is about the fastest lap. Daniel Ricciardo assisted his old friend Max Verstappen. He helped him, yes or no? Did they just want to give him a nice Formula One farewell with the fastest lap? Or did he actively intervene in the championship battle? Christian, how did you see it?
He definitely interfered actively in the championship fight, period. That's a fact. And no one is beating around the bush about it. Christian Horner, Verstappen, everyone is addressing it directly. They're discussing the fact that this was meant to take that point away from Lando. Now we arrive at the fact that this is absolutely legitimate. The Racing Bull can do and decide whatever it wants, and Ricciardo can drive whatever he chooses. That's completely his decision. But if we recall a bit, there are some individuals, including Zak Brown, who has harshly criticized the options of a large team that still has a genuine satellite team, not just a client, but someone who has the same owner entirely. And now, after Franz Toast's departure, who was certainly a distinct personality, we have Christian Horner, who essentially manages both teams from the heights of the Red Bull Motorsport empire. Even with Bayer and Makis leading the team, they still have full control. And this has been clear and obvious since this incident, as Christian Horner does. And now comes the interesting part of the story. This is, of course, not acceptable. However, right now it is in the complicated situation we are currently facing. This topic has been brought up frequently, and I am absolutely certain that we are now back with our sports governing body. We should bring the FIA into the discussion and state that we need to examine this matter as it goes against the sporting code, which, as you correctly mentioned, it has existed for years. Let's see how it goes. In my opinion, it's hard to blame anyone, including Horner, when he has the chance to help his Max gain an advantage. He simply took the opportunity. Ricciardo simply took care of that as his final act. And the Racing Bull did exactly what he was supposed to do. He was always ready to do this. This applies to overtaking, maneuvers, and lapping. Now I'm back to Zak Brown. That's why he definitely wants to ban it and make it impossible in the future.
Now the FIA could do exactly what they did with the whole curse situation and pull up the international sporting code saying, okay, this tarnishes the sport, it's unsportsmanlike and so on. What happened? Should this be done now? In hindsight? No.
No, I don't think so. It has happened as it has happened. But the people at the FIA who look at and analyze such things are not foolish. They know precisely what is happening, and they are aware that during the year it has been unpleasantly so. But I can't imagine for the life of me that there won't be a response here. That one doesn't say, hey guys, we won't do this again. Whether it fits or not, if it can be demonstrated legally in sports or not. I believe this will be observed very carefully because it's effectively 1.5 teams against one, which is not in the spirit of the sport or the regulations.
So it can be said you would have done the same but would feel guilty afterward.
No, I wouldn't feel bad. Fastest lap, I would have done it the same way. I would have handled it as team principal and commanded it like Christian Horner. It's simply one more point, and that's what he gets paid for, to do the best for his team in every way possible. The entire situation, the broader context, needs to be reviewed.
Do you feel? There's a photo of Zach Brown and Christian Horner from the flight, so they managed to reconcile afterward. It's hard to believe since Zach Brown, as you mentioned earlier, has long had this issue as a thorn in his side. But they seem to have come to some agreement. Perhaps there was a glass or two in the mix.
Besides, getting along poorly with Zach Brown is nearly impossible. He's a very pleasant fellow, but he knows what he wants, and even if he's friendly and perhaps enjoys a glass of wine, he definitely made it known that he said people were doing this differently in the future. He won't budge from his position.
What's the deal with Daniel Ricciardo? We've nearly forgotten him in this discussion. He set the fastest lap, and one could say he was misused or he got a little bonus at the end. Is this a dishonorable farewell to his Formula One career, if we consider he won't be in the cockpit again?
Well, I wouldn't say that, because Tsunoda would have had to do the same. So in that sense, I wouldn't call it dignified. It's just that this long decline of Danny Ricciardo seems to be, let's say, coming to an end. We never know exactly what goes on at Red Bull, what relationships might exist to perhaps keep him involved in something. I have no idea, but this year hasn't been his best. It's been obviously an average year. He indeed had worse years. His time at McLaren was a complete disaster. And prior to that, it wasn't so good either. So he has had quite a few years, let's say, a reprieve. And in Formula One, that's just the way it goes. As long as a Colapinto arrives and actually can only view Formula One on TV, I'll say, and drives the way he does, then such Ricciardos will eventually not be undignified, but at least confronted with reality. And in this case, that signifies it's time to depart.
We are almost done with today's magazine, but we still have the AVD pit stop for you. And today it includes a very special interview, since the leader, Lutz Leif Linden, had a conversation with us. Mr. Linden, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. We were particularly excited about this because we will gain real insights into the club and the federation.
Yes, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to respond to a few questions for you, especially for the viewers. And I think it's very interesting because many people can't even imagine the amount of work we handle every day.
Christian Danner told me that you have the longest business card one could possibly have. There are titles. It's not just the management of the AVD, but what does a managing director of the AVD really do? Perhaps we can start with that.
The AVD, which stands for the Automobile Club of Germany, is basically an association in a holding configuration. But to be economically active, that is to deliver all the services to you, you also require GmbHs for tax reasons, meaning companies. That's why there is an economic service GmbH, but there's also a sports GmbH, a publishing house, and many other things. This is why we have a managing director, and we operate around 10 companies that cover the different topics.
Alongside the managing director role, you are now the president as well. What differentiates the president, or what does the president do that the managing director doesn't?
Yes, the president perhaps pays a bit more attention to the individual local clubs we have. In Germany, we have more than 50 local clubs, some of which share a long tradition with the AVD. They have been with us for roughly 120 years, or 120 years together through this time. And naturally, there's a bit more of that individual club mentality. The economic service exists mainly to generate revenue and offer certain things, goods, services, etc. While the association has a very strong political component, meaning we are also something like consumer advocates for drivers. For drivers, we strive to maintain individual transport. These are subjects that are very much involved in the association, and the president is the one who communicates with the transport minister, the finance minister, and the economy minister. He also speaks with car makers as well as other organizations like gas station associations, station operators, oil firms, and more.
I think we should express our gratitude on behalf of all petrol enthusiasts, all the gasoline lovers for their contributions. I think you have done excellent lobbying work, particularly when the EU aimed to eliminate the combustion engine.
Yes, I should mention we have a very good relationship with the Transport Ministry and the Finance Ministry, and I must say you cannot just turn off individual transport, and you also have to consider what to do with the existing fleet. It's wonderful to have a new drive type, but I believe it should be a mix. We must also embrace technology. There will surely still be combustion engines, whether diesel or gasoline. Hybrids will exist, and fully electric cars will be present. We still don't know how fast the hydrogen development is going, if it will happen with fuel cells, if it will use direct injection. There are several options. Therefore, in my opinion, we need to move away from this ban on combustion engines and show much more openness to technology. And that was a tough piece of work to move forward. And we are organized in the European e-fuel audience with many others to advocate together, not only in Germany, not just as AVD, but collectively for motorists. And they clearly see what's going on. Consider what's happening in Italy or France when people say Sweden has even pulled out of the Green Deal. You have to think about that. It doesn't work that way, but they are building 5 or 6 new nuclear reactors to become emission-free. Very interesting developments are suddenly happening after 10 years. I mean, 2035 is 10 years for me. That's much faster than one thinks, and what is supposed to be achieved 2035. On the other hand, I heard yesterday, the climate goals are almost reached by someone from climate research in Potsdam, so it can't be that bad, as some are trying to make us believe.
So, a very important area of activity for the AVD. The other thing that is particularly close to our hearts is motorsport. Why is motorsport so important for the AVD?
Yes, as you already pointed out, we have a long history, but there are also many other offices I represent internationally. The AVD is the one that initiated the popularity of motorsport in Germany. Yes, that means everything really developed from there. Interestingly, the FIA, the Motorsport World Governing Body, is not located in Geneva or Paris. It was created not there, but just around the corner from Frankfurt in Bad Homburg. And what occurred there? The first significant automobile race in Germany, the Gordon Bennett race. Yes, a race through the Taunus. 500 kilometers, of course. Just visualize that, yes. One circuit was just shy of 100 kilometers long, and entrants from all over the world competed there, so nearly, I think. There were 24 vehicles from 8 different makers. It was truly a magnificent event. 1 million spectators. Just imagine that logistically, how they got to the Taunus. And the emperor, who had advocated for this event, suddenly became a great car fan after he experienced the first Gordon Bennett race a year earlier, which was won by a German. That's why it was conducted here in Germany. He suddenly became a passionate motorsport supporter and promoted this race. He then provided the AVD with a patronage at Christmas, thus making the AVD the Imperial Automobile Club. Shortly thereafter, a year and a half later, the Grand Prix events began, and since then, the AVD has organized the Grand Prix of Germany at various racetracks, kicking off at the Avis in Berlin, then later at the Nürburgring, which we also helped shape, and then in...
This is a small excursion into the history of the AVD, but even today the AVD is heavily involved in motorsport, and you in particular. For quite some time I have been the president of the FIA GT Commission and recently also the president of the FIA Manufacturers Committee. What does one actually do there? It's really fascinating to gain some insight into the FIA too.
Hockenheim. Yes, maybe we should start again with the GT Commission. which I have been leading for 3 years now, and I probably haven't done too badly. That's probably the reason they gave me the manufacturers committee as well. A sport, a category that is flourishing. We now have more than 4,000 cars worldwide in GT3 racing. According to the current regulations, about 1,500 vehicles. So it's actually the largest circuit category that exists, and I believe it's incredibly appealing with these vehicles racing because everyone, as you just said, is a petrol head. Of course, everyone wants to have these cars, but they also want to see the races. So what do we do there? It's very much about technology for us. We have the latest vehicle designs that will be available as street cars in 1 or 2 years, but they are also there as race cars already. I know what the next Lamborghini will be like. I know how the next AMG is going to look.
We can talk about that after the recording.
And that's really great because these GT vehicles are based on these street cars. That's how the regulations are structured. It must be based on them, and it cannot be transferred from a race car to a street vehicle. Rather, it's the other way around. First the street car, then the race car. And there we sit down with our engineers and the manufacturers to ensure that they operate within this regulatory framework. This framework is something we jointly approve and refine with the manufacturers to consider their future wishes. So we are currently finalizing the new regulations for 2025 and are already working on the regulations for the next year of the year. To be precise, I want sustainable gasoline. I want to have e-fuels there. We will kick off in Macau using entirely sustainable fuel for the first time. Last year, we had 50% sustainable fuel, and there are always ongoing tech advancements. We place all incoming vehicles in a mint channel to analyze who has what downforce at which wing setting to create a reasonable BOPI afterward. All engines from manufacturers are on a specific FIA test bench near Geneva, where all mappings are evaluated. We read the electronics from front to back, enabling us to clearly state how to balance the vehicles. Thus, at the season start, a universal balance exists for all GT3 vehicles. For all series operators around the world, they usually adapt it slightly for the racetracks. Le Castellet needs a different mapping, obviously, compared to Hockenheim, Dijon, or Imola. That's obvious. This also has specific conceptual advantages for individual vehicle concepts, rear engine, mid-engine, front mid-engine. We know all this. What is the aerodynamics? What is the weight distribution? And from this complex web, a BOP is created.
So sandbagging has no purpose anymore. Everything is well adjusted on your
It
part.
is
It's
becoming
fine.
increasingly difficult. And with more electronics and sensors, they can really predict it quite well. This should be made clear. I believe the FIA is doing a pretty good job. What individual series operators do varies greatly. One must always remember that we don't make a BOP for the drivers. We make it for the car. When you place an amateur with a bronze rating in a race against a silver or platinum driver in the same car, the platinum driver will certainly be much quicker. So we create a BOP for the vehicle with the best possible performance. Output from the driver's performance. Yes, in manufacturers. Naturally, the committee is now even more interesting, with many colleagues present who I have previously worked with in the GT Commission, but this encompasses the whole sport. This means that all manufacturers involved in rallying, Formula One, and other circuit racing are included. This is very, very important. We create new sports, including drifting. The AVD has indeed assumed leadership in Germany and has brought forth a very young sport that is experiencing tremendous popularity.
Yes, these are truly interesting insights that I believe one wouldn't normally receive. Thank you very much for these insights and for taking the time.
Always happy to help. I'm glad I could assist you and our viewers. Talk soon.
Indeed, Lutz Leif Linden is quite an exceptional presence in Germany, that should be noted. First of all, he is a genuine motorsport enthusiast and a knowledgeable expert. He understands the sport thoroughly. Having someone like him in such an important position for motorsport in the FIA is extremely beneficial for all of us. In the end, this is beneficial for motorsport overall, because there are always opportunities where we need intelligent, strong individuals who can advocate for us politically and lobby on our behalf instead of merely observing as we face restrictions. Therefore, this is a very, very important position and clearly the right choice.
This wraps up our AVD pit stop for today. I believe it was quite thrilling. We gained some unique insights into a CEO's life. Normally, you don't get such a big picture of what he actually does, but now I think we all know a bit more. Christian, thank you so much for taking the time again. We actually have a break now, but of course we're not taking a break. We'll be back with a special edition.
In the special episode, I hope someone questions whether Lando in Singapore really crashed into the wall despite such a lead. That's a topic I'd like to discuss again. Let's see if anyone asks about it.
I believe that question will come up quite often now, so we look forward to your questions. Don't forget, #AskAVD. Until next time.
Regardless of the topic, if you have any questions for me, just use #AskAVD.